In Kenya, with the devolution, we are seeing the process, the development going back down to the people. But also because within these cross-border areas, there are international boundaries, but the communities that live within these areas are more or less the same people. For example, for Cluster 3, the communities are largely Somali-speaking community in all the three of the countries. And so these are people that share the same culture, they share the same resources. They are known for mobility because, again, their livelihoods are the same. In Cluster 3, we have pastorals, community that are pure pastoral, and then we have the agro-pastoralists who farm mainly around the Daua River, which also forms the border between Kenya, Ethiopia, and part of Ethiopia and Somalia. And so they share the same resources, they have the same type of livelihoods, they speak the same language, they are related in many ways, they face the same challenges, yet they are separated by the international borders that are there. And also that these are also areas that have not been very well developed if you compare with the other parts of the countries. So it's an interesting experience working in this setup.
You know, this cluster approach is a form of implementation of cross-border cooperation. But you know, there are several policy frameworks that support this kind of cooperation. And we actually need to buy in at all levels, regional, national, and community levels. When we look at, for instance, the Niamey Convention of 2014, which encourages that we should treat the international borders you are referring to, the political borders, boundaries, as bridges rather than treating them as barriers. Now you are again looking at the African Union policy framework on pastoralism of 2011, talking about, you know, the constraints that are actually in these areas, drought-prone areas, and in time and space. When you look at time and temporal and spatial comparisons, you find that some areas at certain times are actually drier than others. So the people are forced to move. So these challenges are again another factor that is tying us in this area. So I don't know whether this is the same kind of conditions, the dry spells that you are also facing on the other side of Mandera. Because in Karamoja cluster, Turkana actually gets impacted so much with drought, and the pastoralists, the herders, and the herds are forced to move across the borders in search for pasture and water on the other side. I remember we had a dialogue some time back, and the pastoralists don't differentiate between water and pasture. They almost take them, you know, to be the same. When you ask them what is the main problem where you are moving, it is because of the number one problem, which is water. But again, they go ahead to say it is because of the number one problem, which is pasture. Two number ones, and if you are to place them to be number two, two number twos. So these are the issues which are happening on the other side.
If you have pasture and no water, it will not work. If you have water and no pasture, it will not work. So they are both number ones. They go hand in hand. And so when you're looking at development in these cross-border areas, you need to ensure that you have both the feed and the water for the people. Now, still in Mandera, we have similar interaction. For Cluster 3, they are mostly Somali-speaking people. But traditionally, they have moved across the borders in search of water and pasture for their livelihoods. But we're also finding that they are engaging in some level of trade between the communities. If you go to Mandera, for example, the river is there. Unfortunately, the boundary is the river, and we're saying we build bridges. The river is more of a barrier, but the communities there have found a way around crossing this river. It's seasonal, but when it is high, it's really high. And they have this floaters that they use. And there's a lot of trade, formal and informal, that is happening between these communities. They trade. You find that Mandera grows a lot of vegetable, onions, tomatoes. The market is on the Ethiopian side of the cluster. You find that they have, Mandera have like construction material, they can find them easily in Mandera, so they move them across the river. So these are areas that are interdependent, and they really appreciate that interdependence. But there are still quite a number of challenges that affect that cooperation between the countries.
When you look at the, like for instance, Uganda now and Kenya, on the 12th of September 2019, the President of Uganda, His Excellency President Museveni, and then His Excellency President Kenyatta, they met and they came up with a memorandum of understanding that promotes peace and development. And in that respect, because it was a very, very serious commitment, it attracted the attention of several partners, including the government ministries, departments, and agencies. You know, following that MoU that we signed, we have reached a very high level in terms of development. And we are about to sign it this November 2021. But the aspect of gender is not coming out very well. And I'm glad to be in this meeting. So you can even see, I think these kind of interactions, dialoguing, these meetings are becoming beneficial in helping us in having some things of that kind. I told her, you are in the right place with the right people. You need to work with the regional gender harms such that you take it to that level and incorporate those aspects into this programming document that you are about to sign. So you see, some of these things are really happening. And that takes us even to the community levels. I think we are already in Karamoja, despite the governments, the regional and national bodies, the communities are getting into resource sharing agreements. Now, these resource sharing agreements, even if we don't accept it at the other level, it's being accepted down here. So the way to go, I think, should be accepting it and seeing how to help. How is it working the other side?
For Cluster 3, I would be just fair to say it's like a new kid on the block. So we don't have the kind of elaborate MOUs that we've had bilaterally between Kenya and Uganda and within the cluster in Cluster 1. But there's still a lot of room for forming that kind of agreements, especially when it comes to issues of cross-border trade. Then again, these are communities that, when we sit in our headquarters, wherever it is, we kind of tend to think they don't have much structure on the ground. But when you go on the ground and you work with them, you appreciate that they have so much structure on the ground, and they understand their own way of understanding gender, because they have their own gender dynamics. So ideally what we are doing as development workers within these clusters is just to try and tweak that is already existing without necessarily causing any conflict among the community. Because remember that when you come from class and you walk to the community, you want to dictate what you want them to do. But these are people who have lived in peace, in cohesion for many years. So they have some existing structures. Some might not be very favorable, so you work with them towards changing them to become better, so that both gender are taken into consideration, and so that that development becomes inclusive. Some of this that happens is programmed. We do it in our documents when we're doing our project documents. For example, we say we want to have 30% women, but the communities could already be doing 50. So when you are already going in with your 30%, feeling like you are measuring with the SDGs, the communities are way ahead of you. So some also comes unintended. We've had an experience in the Ethiopian side of the project where we had them do their community action plans and propose what they want to do. Of course, we said we want to see women participation in it and wherever. Well, we're quite pleasantly surprised in one of the unintended outcomes of the project, because the community among themselves were able to decide, oh fine, we have pasture now, what can our women do? and they chose to go into sheep and goat fattening. And they were able to do it in the first stage of our implementation, and they were quite happy about it. Interestingly, it's the men who proposed. So you see, if you drive a process, you guide the process, they adopt the process, it's much, much more easier for them to take it forward and for it to be sustained, because both parties within the community have come to the realization that that is beneficial to them. So it's interesting to see how that goes within the cluster. Now, for cluster 3, we still don't have a coordination unit like you have in cluster 1. So perhaps you could share with us, what's your experience of having the cluster coordination unit within cluster 1?
I was able to reach out to West Pokot and then reach out to some silent, very, very active bodies that existed and contributed a lot. Like, for instance, the Atacare Women Forum. The Atacare Women Forum. We were able to discover that this was a group of women spread all over these areas, the geographical areas that I was referring to, and having a connection, but they were involved in peace building. And their contribution was actually realized much in Peace 3. When I conducted that, I found that Peace 3 actually promoted it so much. And after Peace 3 ended early 2019, their involvement in peace building almost died out. And today, I was again very, very happy to see that there was kind of a union by somebody, a participant we picked from the Karamoja sub-region of Uganda, Helen Pulkol here, met somebody she worked with in Mandera cluster as women in peace building. You know, these are some of the things that, because of the existence of the unit, we have unearthed and been able to realize that actually, I think there is much contribution that we are ignoring in here. We are looking at areas of private sector developments in these areas of the clusters, which need much attention. And you know, that's the area that the women venture a lot in, private sector development is very key. But currently you find that this private sector development in these areas are very low, and even the engagement by partners is still low. So these kind of things have been happening there. In the cluster now, because of the existence of the unit in the Karamoja cluster, we are able to downscale the climate information and services that is being shared at a very high level, GACOF, the Great Horn of Africa Climate Outlook Forum. And we are now downscaling it and bringing this information to a low level to the people in the clusters, because we know this is where the end users are. So basically we did the first one in the Karamoja cluster in 2020 for the March, April, May rainy season, and the people appreciated it much because of the facilitation unit, bringing down some of these things that happen at a high level. And again, we are planning another one, because whatever is being done in cluster 1 is supposed to be replicated in other clusters. So you can see, we are pulling services from a higher level to a lower level because of this structuring of having a unit at a low level. And actually good things are happening down there. There are forms of statements coming up. You find people saying, IGAD has finally come to the ground. So we are representing IGAD at that level. And those are from the political leadership and the authorities. But again, a statement from the civil society organizations and NGOs that IGAD has finally opened our doors. So eventually, the cluster approach, I think, is reaching out to a level that is being appreciated. And I think you stated very well that Mandera cluster does not have a cross-border development facilitation unit. And I think we need to be supported in this regard. We would like lessons to be replicated from the Karamoja cluster into the other cluster. Because apparently, The government of Uganda, first of all, we thank the government of Uganda for hosting the IGAD Cross-Border Development Facilitation Unit. The office sits in a government facility that was provided by the Office of the Prime Minister. So I think there is a role for the governments to play in this regard.
That's beautiful. We look forward to having a similar establishment, not only in Cluster 3, but in the other clusters too, because I think it will help a lot to do the coordination. When we started implementing in Cluster 3, the PPU was actually one of the initial project documents that was developed. And thereafter, the EUTF Boresha IGAD Partnership Program that is implemented by IGAD.
I don't know some of those abbreviations.
Yes, sorry, sometimes we speak in coded language. So, but within the last 5 years, we have seen quite a number of projects and donors now interested in Cluster 3. And we would want those efforts to be directed in such a way that there is no duplication or replication of efforts, that we build upon what has already been done. For example, if it's baselines, we have some baselines, Boresha has some baselines, but we can only be able to achieve those if we have a coordination unit functional within the cluster. That way, the resources will be directed better, and then also we have challenges in the cluster, and I think many of the partners were shying away from implementing there, and mainly because of the security issues. And you know, when you have development, then people don't have time to fight, and you can attest to this in what has happened in Cluster 1, where the warriors now have put aside their guns and are now farming. And we'd want to see this kind of response within Cluster 3. When you engage the youth, when you engage the women and the men, and they are sufficient in what they are producing, because these are areas that are rich. For example, Dawa River can irrigate quite a big chunk of these 3 countries. If they utilize it well, then they can have good fodder, they can have their livestock secured, their livelihoods will be good. So much of that uncertainty and insecurity will go down. Also, with infrastructural development also coming in, for example, if we have a bridge over the Dawa River, then communication between the 2 countries improves, then trade also improves, then money starts flowing. So we're looking forward to seeing greater things happening in Cluster 1. Not to say that nothing is happening, we are happy, a lot is happening. I know Boresha have done quite some work in Cluster 3, and they will be telling us within this meeting what they have done. We have also done much in terms of institutional capacity building, in terms of both the tangible capacity building, putting in infrastructure to help the livelihoods to be sustainable, the trainings, facilitating the cooperative movements within the cluster, which is quite a key institution within these communities, giving a few emphasis and a bit bias towards the women to make sure that they have something to do for themselves by giving them grants, training them in, giving them skills on how to handle, for example, milk and meat, which we know they trade in. So there's a lot that is happening, and the future, I can say, is bright for this cluster.
I think as we come to the end of it, I'd like to appreciate one fact. When you come to the issue of insecurity, the people, the locals here now, the communities are really using the firearms. So this brings me to one thing. I think when we are, when initiatives are being taken, cross-border initiatives, I think they need to be synchronized in a way. Like for instance, Uganda did disarmament of the communities in Karamoja way back in 2007. It had tried before very many times, and in 2007 it was regarded as a successful disarmament. And we had peace for some time. But in 2019, around November, again we saw something come up in the form of livestock-related insecurities. Now, this disarmament happened when the neighbors, the communities from Toposa, from Turkana, from Nyangatom, Zuma, Desnach, were still also holding some guns. So in the future, I think the governments should really get interested in synchronizing some of these kind of initiatives, such that the other person does not get reharmed because the neighbor is still having some harms. So these are the kind of very, very, very serious challenges. The challenge of insecurity is a very serious challenge that we are faced with now. Thank you.